Welcome, everybody. Thank you guys for joining our webinar this morning. We're going to give a minute or two to let everybody trickle in, but I just wanted to make a quick introduction. I'm Evan. I'm the Director of Sales here over at HybridChart. And again, we'll give a minute or so. Dr. Sanders, let me know when you want to get started.
I think we should just give people a minute and then get going.
Right, it is 9:01. I am going to get started. Again, welcome everybody. We are very excited today to host a webinar addressing healthcare's true blind spots. We've got two great companies here today, HybridChart, Charge Capture Solution, and MD Revolution, remote patient monitoring and transitional care management. We are going to address a few things, mainly around supporting patient post-discharge and reducing readmission rates. And we've got a great case study, I think, that actually shows higher reduction in readmissions on that. So we're going to go over a few things. We are two companies that have come together and collaborated to make somewhat of a unique workflow process. We're going to address the problem of high readmission rates, figure out how we can solve that, address why partnerships matter and the continuity of care at the point of discharge. And then we're also going to run through a case study that we ran together, as well as some questions and answers. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to write them in the text box. We will be addressing those at the end. And again, I'm Evan Forsyth, the Director of Sales. We've also got on the line as a panelist, the Vice President of MD Revolution, or Vice President of Sales for MD Revolution, Paul Huffman. And we are also going to be presented today by two of our founders and CEOs, Dr. Samir Damani of MD Revolution and Dr. Greg Sanders with HybridChart. I will pass it along and we can get started. Oh, and this is just a recap of where we just ran over. And we can, I'm going to pass this off to Dr. Damani to kick us off.
Yeah, so thanks, Evan. When I first started MD Revolution about a decade ago, it was really after an observation that patients that managed or measured what they did seemed to manage their heart failure and their hypertension and their coronary disease much better. These are patients that simply that wouldn't even take blood pressure medicine, and all of a sudden, with getting them to write it down and send it to me via email, they would go from not taking it to saying, hey, maybe I should take this at night because my blood pressure tends to be higher in the morning. And so, what I came to realize, like in anything in life and in business, what you measure, you manage. And so one of the foundational principles that we formed the company with was around this idea that patients with chronic disease generally lack two main components that I think can be assisted with both people and technology, and that is awareness and accountability. And through, awareness you can build through measurement. We learned that. And accountability can be through better frameworks around high touch care. And so that's really where we started from. And today, we've served over 160,000 patients. We have over 50,000 active patients on our platform at this time. And we are delivering this high-touch care that is technology-enabled through the platform, our Medicare's platform, which has been chronic care management, remote patient monitoring, and more recently, transitional care management.
Great. Hi, everyone. Greg Sanders. I'm a practicing cardiologist and the founder, CEO of HybridChart. For those of you who don't know, the tool that we've created kind of handles the inpatient management of patients. So most practices who are functioning in their office quite well, when they leave their office, they somehow lose all of their resources. So our tool was designed out of the need of my original practice years ago, to manage inpatient rounding, manage charge capture, have secure communication built into it, and then most importantly, discharge management. One of the challenges we had was, how do we connect the inpatient and outpatient worlds together? And as a practicing doctor early on, I realized that these two worlds were very, very disjointed, and it was frustrating, and patients were getting lost and patients weren't getting very good care. We went national as a company in 2016. We are now a national company in every state. We have every footprint in terms of specialty, all the medical subspecialties and surgical subspecialties. I think that the the driving force behind why this partnership is strong between our two companies is that last part of the discharge management tool. So I think that we have a framework of how to start capturing these patients as they're coming out of the hospital, and MD Revolution sort of fit very, very nicely into that space to actually execute on the things that need to happen. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how the physicians who are sort of at the forefront of most healthcare right now, they are the weakest link when it comes to driving some of the things we're trying to do for CCM and RPM and TCM. A lot of M's there, but we're going to talk a little bit about how our software integration with MD Revolution kind of takes the physician out of the role where they have to do everything manually. So on that note, we can go to the next slide. So as I just said, a lot of the inpatient outpatient spaces are quite disjointed, and when patients come out of the hospital, most of the office staff have no idea who's even in the hospital, let alone who's coming out. And this is our opportunity to take better care of patients. This is our opportunity to grab the higher risk patients and make sure that they get adequate care and that they don't get readmitted, and that they get follow-up visits with the right resources right away. Integrating all of these workflows together has been a challenge. Data systems tend to not talk to each other. Staff are usually the blind spots of they don't know what's actually happening on the inpatient side. And so getting all this aligned properly is really the secret sauce of how you're going to take better care of patients. What ends up happening is not just an improvement in quality of care, there's improvements in patient satisfaction. There are definitely some revenue streams that start to open up. You are recapturing patients, you're opening up new revenue streams on the existing patients. So I think there's a lot of opportunity if you can do this right. And that's what we're going to dive into today, is a little bit about how do we set this up properly for success, and how do we take a system that's been historically broken and fix it. And if you ask most people what's wrong with healthcare, and then you have your big list of what's wrong with healthcare, this is high on the list of things that are broken.
So one of the low-hanging fruits of a platform that's really geared towards Medicare patients is really around hospital readmissions. I mean, right now, 1 in 5 Medicare patients is readmitted within 30 days of discharge, and that's cost Medicare about $26 billion in 2022. If you take all patients, it's around $41 billion, and of that, heart failure, COPD, heart attack readmissions represent over 60% of this. And these are all patients that can easily be targeted with some of the care management programs we note here, including medication adherence, early intervention that's provided by CCM and RPM, obviously patient education, and then coordinated care from the practices. So it looks like most hospital averages are somewhere in the 15 to 20% range for these are national averages based on the Kaiser Family Foundation. And so we'll show you kind of what we've been able to see with our clients with respect to the ability to make an impact on some of these numbers.
So everyone's always going to ask, well, how do you know if you're winning? If you don't have some clear outline goals, then it's going to be hard to know when you've crossed the finish line. I think that for both of our platforms, there's a lot of analytics wrapped around what we're doing. We want to make sure that the right resources are in place to capture every possible patient that could qualify for this type of program and have it automated. And then we would do a lot of analytics to make sure that those patients are truly the denominator of what's occurring. And then once they enter into the MD Revolution platform, then there are a lot of analytics there that can help make sure that you're leveraging this program properly and that all the patients are receiving the resources that they qualify for. I think it's important that we understand what the denominator looks like going in, and when we go into a practice that we really understand what the potential is, and then benchmarks along the way to make sure that we're hitting it on time.
So before we dive into more details, if you really just take a step back and think about how models like care management have grown and shown to be effective in heart failure, COPD, and in hospital admissions, as well as even concierge models, which have been proven to show better outcomes in heart failure. It's really about how do you touch patients? How can you reach them on a more frequent basis so that you're not going into this kind of what we call epistrophic care model, where it's episodic catastrophic care, where now more than ever, patients are struggling to get into their primary care doctors and certainly their specialists. And so when they do see you, they're so far gone that you almost have to admit them. Or if you have to admit them, how can we get them in, at an earlier state? And so the whole platform that we've created has been built around technology-enabled care management, where you can take a care manager, which might be able to do 1 to 20, 1 to 30 patients, now scale that to 1 to 100 patients. And we do that through our platform, which we've spent over a decade on, and probably nearly $30 million in investment, both research and development, where we're able to use deep HR integration with all the major electronic health records, combine it with really proactive algorithms, real-time machine learning, and the ability to take a medical assistant and who can manage, normally maybe 20, 50, 100 to well over 100 patients. And so that allows us to really build a cloud-based, high-touch model that can be delivered both in a full service fashion, but also can be used by practices through our SaaS platform. And that's kind of foundational to how we really look at technology enablement for practice today that are struggling with the workflows that they already have. So what's nice is that, initially, I believe it was 2016, Medicare for the first time, really started to reimburse for asynchronous care, which was really revolutionary at the time. And, in addition, now we have remote patient monitoring, which allows for the ability to collect data from devices that are connected. And so, we have blood pressure, blood glucose, monitors, thermometers, and a number of other pulse oximeters, and a number of other mechanisms now to collect real-time data to really target patients at high risk for readmissions and other complications. So most of, from an integrated model perspective, you'll find that almost all patients really qualify for either CCM and RPM, and most qualify for both. We've seen a tremendous improvement in patient engagement. We find that RPM is helpful in that it drives greater accuracy as well as greater engagement when they have an active, engaged, and actually connected device. We're also seeing greater retention as well as faster adoption. And what's nice about CCM RPM is you're just getting paid for the work that many practices already do. And, the fact is that the dual program enrollment doesn't really require much time that is in addition to what you're already spending. So there's a lot less redundancy and greater return on your investment.
So let's talk a little bit about Hybrid Chart and how we fit into this model. So when I first created Hybrid Chart, I was really trying to solve my own pain points. And we do 4 basic things, and I won't go into too much detail here. We organize all the rounding at multiple facilities. So we're a single platform, sort of a thin veneer that sits on top of multiple systems to allow a practice to be super functional and organized. And we handle handoffs and things like that. Number two is we're going to do charge capture in 3 seconds. So revenue for practices start to go up 8 to 12% because they're not bleeding charges with a paper system. Our secure communication platform is embedded in the whole process. So it's not really a standalone tool. It's built into the entire solution. And then lastly, we have the discharge management. So at the bedside, 3 taps on your phone and you've made their follow-up appointment. You have custom order sets that you can create. And this, I think, was the part that really excited MD Revolution in terms of how to feed the patients needed for all of their management into their system. Now, I designed these 4 pillars really almost to satisfy the physician's needs, but that wasn't really the reason why I built HybridChart. The reason why I built HybridChart was I needed to satisfy this physician needs so I could get them out of the way when it came to all the other things we need to do for value-based care, population health management. If we're relying on the doctor to push a button every time we need something, it's never going to happen. And I figured that out my first day in practice. So HybridChart has the ability to automatically trigger actions behind the scenes based upon the physician behavior or actions, and it's based on rule sets. So to us, this was we always were looking for, how do we find a partner like MD Revolution? How do we find someone who's willing to embrace our technology and be on the receiving end of some of those actions? The goal here is for the doctor to just do their thing, take care of patients, do their charge capture, discharge patients, and then magically behind the scenes, MDR gets a real-time feed of all these patients very upstream, so that you can take better care of them and plug them into the program early on. The last thing you ever want to do is start asking doctors to do more things, because their answer is going to be no, or it'll be maybe if I'm free that day, or if I'm not getting crushed that day. So we're looking more for consistency. And again, back to that slide where we talked about how do we know if we're winning? Well, I mean, if we say this is the opportunity and we're only hitting a percentage of it because the doctors are breaking point, that's going to be a big problem. Next slide, please. So some of what we do on the HybridChart side, and it's not unique to MDR, but for this example, I think it's very important, is number one is solve the provider workflow. So our mantra has always been, get a tool in the hands of the doctors that they like, that they're going to use, because then you get all the benefits downstream. Number two is start collecting data based on rule sets. So don't ask the doctor to start collecting data manually, just base it upon what they're doing. And that's what HybridChart is designed to do very easily. And then lastly, and this is the kicker, initiate clinical pathways automatically. So as I just said, if you have a patient that qualifies for TCM, RPM, get them in the hands of MD Revolution in real time automatically without the doctor doing anything active. And now you've got a framework where things are actually going to work. In medicine, I find that we have so many good ideas and good intentions, and a lot of these systems just simply break down because of the mechanics. And so I view HybridChart as the framework and the enabling system, and MDR is on the receiving end to handle all of the patients that are coming out of the hospital that need these services, and then taking their automation tools. Now you've got from beginning to end a system that is not going to be too resource heavy on any of the staff, and this is where it usually breaks down. I'll start the first one here. So if we look at the workflow from beginning to end, if you look all the way on the left side, so what I was just talking about is that our technology is going to automatically trigger patients to be entered and registered into the MDR care program. And that needs to happen automatically with a lot of visibility, with a lot of reporting opportunities, so that you know that you're hitting everyone that's coming out of the hospital, and that you're not burdening the doctors with saying, okay, well, now you've got to remember this when you're running around taking care of hospitalized patients. And Dr. Damani, you can continue from the next part.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Dr. Sanders, this is Paul from MD Revolution. I think that is the best example of why the integrated solutions, having both partners being integrated with the EMR, is extremely important, right? So not only having our two systems talk to each other and flag the patients automatically with hybrid chart, but then to pass that information through the EMR and then over to MD Revolution. That the EMR is still the source of truth for demographics and the patient record and all the patient information, but we're gaining that eligibility and those automated workflows from hybrid chart within those different facilities that you might be rounding on with. So after that, there is a flag through that integration then to officially enroll the patient, reach out, talk to them, and gain consent, as both of these programs require, and then connect them with remote devices and distribute them. So that is done by then our team after it's been automatically flagged through hybrid chart back through the EMR. Then we can, after they're enrolled and after they get their either their equipment or officially into the program, then it's really developing the detailed care plan based on the patient's conditions, supporting continuity and focused care and connected care with a lot of different connections and providers through that system. And then it's really monitoring and engaging the patient throughout the month, like Dr. Damani mentioned. It's a proactive care plan and outreach, and also monitoring of the vitals inside the patient's home. And then it's also submitting and generating those claims at the close of each month, and making sure everything is documented properly inside the EMR. And then it's really a rinse and repeat for those patients that are enrolled. And we'll go into it here in just a little bit. But why is all of this important, and why is it important to have these types of partnerships? If we can move to the next slide, I'll talk about that a little bit. Continuity of care, everyone talks about it, but it's hard to solve. So we at MD Revolution constantly get asked, how do these programs work? Do you have readmission data? Do you have outcomes data? And all of that is really hard for us to prove because of the disconnected EMR systems, or also discharge planning between facilities and the outpatient providers and clinics. So that's why this continuity of information between hybrid chart, our mutual customers, and the patients is really important. Now we can actually follow, and even in the case that we're going to talk about, retrospectively look at data, but then also proactively look at the data and have a plan going forward as far as readmissions go. And that, of course, equals improved care. We are more efficient in our workflows and continuity within the practice. And then also we have the data to back it up. Are these programs working, and what are the return on investment, but also what is the return for quality of care for the patient?
Let's talk about an actual customer, a mutual customer. So Cardiac Solutions is a 22, maybe even more than that by now, cardiology practice in the Phoenix location. This practice has been a hybrid chart customer for a decade. They are, I have to give them kudos here. They are the most proactive, thought conscious practice I've seen in my whole career. They are probably responsible for a lot of the improvements that we've had on the hybrid chart platform, just based on their forward-looking and sort of out-of-the-box thinking. They're always looking at ways to provide quality of care to their patients, and to do it on a lean model. In the Phoenix community, they are definitely known for their excellence of care and excellence in operation. And they came to us and said, listen, we have this new partner, MD Revolution. We are very excited about them, and can you work with them to help us try to piece this all together? And once again, boy, were they right in terms of putting together two companies that belong together. And as a testament to them, this is them really just trying to help make the process better overall. So that's the backdrop for who we're going to present to you as a case study of how it went before and after MD Revolution got involved.
So a little bit on the data, we looked at about 42,000 records, including 26,000 unique patients. the cohort was 1,000 people enrolled in RevUp before the first admission occurred, or enrolled within 30 days of their first admission, but not before a readmission. And we compare this to 25,000 unique patients not enrolled in care management at the time of readmission. So what you see here is, as I talked about the Family Health Foundation, you can see the green line is the patients that were not enrolled in care management. So that would serve as a control group in essence. And so if you can kind of see the 30-day readmission right at 15%, which is where it's actually a little bit lower than some of the national averages for heart failure, which are closer to 20%. But in general, in line with what you would expect. And you can see that this went up as the year progressed, all the way up to 30%. But the purple, you can see the line diverges actually quite quickly, which is, a pretty good indicator of a treatment effect. If you're thinking about, typical double-blind placebo trials, and you can see that the lines not only diverge, but they stay diverged. So there's not a trend where, there's a decreasing effect towards the tail end of the year. You can see that the lines almost stay completely parallel, where the readmissions are essentially cut in half, certainly in the almost by 2/3 in the first 30 days, actually, or actually I would say about half in the first 30 days, and then a little less than that. But nonetheless, the impact is quite great. And the difference, even at, if you look at 30 days, it's about a 10% difference. And if you try to estimate what the impact this has, if you take 10% divided into 100, that's 10 is a 1 to 10. So for every 10 people enrolled in the program, you would prevent one hospital readmission. And if you look at readmission data as about one hospital readmission is about $16,000, that's quite a bit of money being saved from this. And then, at the same time, you're generating extra revenue for the practice. So it's, both doing good and doing well. So the kind of the patients you want to be thinking about for these programs are those that are high risk. So those that would benefit the most from these kinds of programs are, obviously COPD, heart failure, end-stage renal disease, dialysis patients, coronary disease patients that are on multiple medications. So if you look at the typical Medicare population, I would say, about 30 to 40% of them are these kind of high-risk patients. And then the rest are lower risk, but it's not to say they wouldn't benefit, but, from a perspective of preventing hospitalizations, that would be where you would target. We, utilize integrated technology, which means that you want the integrated EHR, so that we're integrated with your EHR, but also integrated technology, and that we, have hybrid chart to, from in the hospital to RevUp out of the hospital. We've got the mobile apps, and then obviously our staff is using RevUp, and in many cases, communications going back and forth from the EHR. Comprehensive education is always important. As we talked about, patient awareness and accountability is critical, and in order to do that, being able to educate them is very important. The ability to coordinate care from practice sites, hospitals is very important, and ultimately buy-in from all members of the care team and the clinical goals is going to be critical as well.
Thank you both. Yeah, I'm going to open it up for a Q&A. And first, I'll start off with some of the commonly asked questions that myself or Evan get in the field when we're talking to either clients, current clients, or potential clients, and then also mutual clients between the two companies. I'll start with Dr. Damani. You touched on it a little bit, but how do you qualify, if you're rounding at either a SNF or at a hospital, how do you qualify which patients are suitable candidates for these programs?
If they're a Medicare patient and they're in the hospital, they're a candidate in my mind, because just by having had a hospital admission, they're high risk. So I think, that would include diagnosis, include pneumonia, COPD, and some of the other things I talked about, heart failure, coronary disease care. All these patients are, self-selected by that time that they're in the hospital. So from that perspective, it's pretty easy. If you're in the outpatient arena, I think you can target some of those same conditions that we just talked about, and start really focusing on them perhaps first, and then going from there. But yeah, that's kind of how I think about this.
Yeah, I'd also like to mention everybody that's on the call right now. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom, and you can just punch in the questions into the Q&A, and I'll be able to see them, and I'll get to those at the very end when we go through these. After we go through these, let's talk about the cost of each of the programs. That's obviously a lot of the questions that we get when talking to future clients. Dr. Sanders, would you touch on the cost and how you guys structure that to use the platform, and then I'll then go to Dr. Damani for the same.
Right. Thank you. So, as a physician, I've been on the receiving end of being nickeled and dimed by numerous healthcare organizations. So our model is very simple. We have people pay per provider per month or per year, and everyone else in the organization gets a free account. The cost tends to be about equivalent to one follow-up visit per month. So our retail price is $149 per provider per month. And discounts obviously start to happen when you sign up for longer contracts and things like that. But the goal here is for you to recoup a lot of charges that you're leaving on the table. So most practices see a revenue bump on inpatient charges from 8 to 12%. Even with the best intentions and the best ways that you think you're reconciling, most practices are losing money on charge capture. Then there's some revenue gains for not losing patients in follow-up. So our discharge management system really allows you to hold on to your patients and not lose them, which brings more revenue to the table. And then third, I'm kind of jumping to the ROI one also, is that the amount of staff that you need to dedicate to bringing the whole inpatient service to run starts to go way down. And so there's some cost savings on your overhead side as well. I think that we try to make it very simple. The reason why I mentioned that we don't charge for people other than providers is that you definitely don't want to have to think about, should I add my front office staff and give them licenses? Oof, now I got to pay for it. The answer is yes. We want all these people involved, and they get free licenses. So we just charge based upon who has an MPI number and who can actually generate revenue for the practice.
Great. Dr. Damani, same question. When we're looking at the cost for the remote care programs and then the return on investment on that cost, what do you typically see out in the field?
Yeah, so these programs are typically fully covered by Medicare and Medicare Advantage. Patients might have a small copay. Many times that's taken care of by their supplemental plan. But in terms of as we talked about, hospitalization costs are over $15,000. So it's a good return.
And then for the practice themselves, or when we partner with a medical group like Cardiac Solutions or whomever, is there then a separate revenue stream for those practices as well?
Yeah, did you want to go?
Yeah, I mean,
I was going to let Dr. Sanders answer first, or
I mean, yeah. So I think that the revenues come from those three places. So it's really from recoup charge capture, from patients that don't get lost to follow-up, and reducing your staffing needs. I think the ones that we don't talk about, which are potential intangibles, are things like scalability. So a practice that normally has clunky processes and can't expand to other markets and get into other hospital systems don't do it because their systems are broken. We fix their systems, and now all of a sudden they're scaling and growing. So that's one. Number two has to do with physician burnout, which is another intangible. So most of our providers gain back about 3 hours per week of time that they can either devote to catching up, going home and spending time with their families, but all the time that they don't realize they're wasting in the whole rounding process, we're going to give that time back to them. And I think there's also a level of satisfaction from the staff themselves. So most of the time when we talk to a practice and we sit down with their front office staff, who normally have to communicate with the doctors out in the field, or have to scrounge to answer the phone for someone who comes out of the hospital and says, hey, I was just admitted for a week for heart failure. And the staff is like, ooh, I didn't even know you were in the hospital. And now they've got to squeeze someone into a schedule. With the process changing and flipping upside down, where you're being very proactive from both of our systems, the level of staff satisfaction goes way up as well. So I think there's a lot of impact on the entire practice from top to bottom when you bring these types of processes and R2 solutions into their space.
Can you, Dr. Sanders, can you talk a little bit about your experience, before starting Hybrid Chart? What do clinics do, or what is the typical process if I have one EMR in the office, I have another one at a SNF that I round at, but then I also have Cerner or Epic inside the hospital? What were those challenges before, and how do you connect the dots between those interactions?
Well, and I'll try not to have too much PTSD as I describe this, but it's a mess. It's a paper-based system most of the time, and there's multiple layers where it breaks down. There's a lot of phone calls of who do I need to see at which hospital. There's no way to figure out who's been seen in real time. So oftentimes I would be driving to a hospital, get there only to find out that everyone's already been seen. I didn't even need to be there. If you're relying upon Epic or Cerner for their patient lists to be the source of truth, unfortunately, they're not. So I'd get phone calls that, hey, you missed 3 patients, and I'd have to turn around and go back and start rounding on them again. We would do our charge capture on these big, like they're pieces of paper that I'd fold very neatly into squares and then lose. And sometimes my dry cleaner would hand me a stack of them, or I'd find a bunch in my trunk buried underneath some stuff. So it was very, very inefficient. And from a staff point of view, how were they letting us know about new consults? Well, they were texting us with their personal cell phone with patient information, PHI in it. Not a great scenario, versus having the system, securely message all the people that need to know about it. So having this sense of connectivity back to the office is really gratifying once it's in place. Everybody's always afraid of change. So when I first created Hybrid Chart, I would have to say that the welcome wagon from my practice was not big, because everyone, worries about change, and they worry about how are we going to adapt to this, and is it really going to work? And we've been burned before. So I think once you get it in their hands, then they start to see that, okay, this is making my life easier, not harder. And then they start to realize the value pretty quickly in. And I think looking at bringing MD Revolution in, the biggest challenge is going to be, well, wait, now you're giving me more to do. And the answer is no, we got a process. Everything's going to happen in a relatively automated fashion. You're going to be getting all this extra revenue with a lot of support and a lot of infrastructure wrapped around it. So I think that's a commonality between both companies in terms of how we approach process improvement. Does that answer, Paul?
Yeah.
Without me crying into the microphone about my day prior to Hybrid Chart.
Yeah. I just see it as connecting the dots, right? And then similar question, Dr. Damani. What are the revenue? We touched on the revenue expectations a little bit from a cost savings for the system, but what are the revenue expectations for a practice that's implementing these programs?
Yeah, with the integrated model with CCM RPM, we're looking at typically about $60 to $70 or net revenue per patient per month. So can be pretty significant at scale.
Great. And then what was your experience? You talked a little bit about starting the company, but how previously or before these models were even allowed by Medicare from a reimbursable standpoint, how do you keep track of patients in between office visits, or what was that like, and how does the service and the software like MD Revolution help solve that challenge?
Well, I think, it was very piecemeal. Obviously, you would have a nurse that would then, manage the tasks. But again, it was very reactive in that you were really treating an acute situation most of the time. I think what CCM RPM allows for is really to get more in front of those kind of catastrophic situations where the patient now can't breathe and they need to be admitted because they need IV diuretics, as opposed to just being able to bump their diuretic dosing, or for that matter, get the right inhaler for a COPD patient, or maybe a dose of steroids. So there's just a lot of opportunity for getting to the patient earlier.
Yeah, and I being on the other side of this, this partnership, and I've been through a lot of partnership discussions and launches and active partnerships as well. And what's nice about this between our two companies is the amount of data that is available and that is produced through these workflows that allow us to even consider measuring these outcomes and admissions and readmissions. I mean, that it's just something that the EMRs lack, and it really is connecting the dots. And I said that earlier, but Dr. Sanders, if a clinic wants to implement hybrid chart, what's the process and how long does it usually take?
Yeah, so we basically try to be as leastly disruptive as possible. Most of our implementations start with a practice evaluation where we really want to understand your workflow and process. So you kind of get a process consultation built into the implementation. And what we tend to do is get to know the key players in the practice very well and do a kickoff call, start rolling it out depending on the size of the practice. I would say most practices from kickoff call to go live is probably about 2 weeks. I know that sounds ambitious, but it really is a short lift. We can train a physician in 28 minutes, and we know how to train them because we know how they think and we know what they're looking for. Larger practices may take 30 or 45 days till they're fully implemented, but things happen relatively quickly. A lot of times just because we understand the process and we bring a lot of resources to the table. As a small side note, so again, I've been on the receiving end of being nickeled and dimed. I've also been on the receiving end of horrible customer service. So we vowed at the onset of this company to never be like that. And so our account managers will get to know our customers very, very well. They are always accessible by phone. They have access to our schedules. We go on site. We sometimes when it's relevant, but we're really deeply involved with their processes. And most of the phone calls we get after the first 2 months are not, hey, we're in trouble, something's not working. It's more like, hey, we have this challenge, and before we try to figure it out ourselves, we figured we'd call you because Hybrid Chart probably has it figured out already. So I think that to answer the original question, it's probably 2 weeks to get someone up and running, and probably 30 days for a larger practice to be fully implemented.
Great. Yeah, I'll add to that as well. I mean, it takes us usually about 4 weeks to launch a new site. The biggest thing for us is provider, staff, and program champion awareness inside the practice. We're providing a service to a lot of patients very quickly, so you want to make sure that the staff is ready to handle any questions on the back end. Also, a lot of our EMR partners, sometimes it takes a few weeks to get that integration to go live. So we just really want to make sure that all that is set up, we have the correct data to go live, and then start providing the service. So about a 3 to 4 week implementation timeline for us as well. Are there any other questions in the chat? We did get one on the implementation, so I touched on that a little bit more just now. Any additional ones? I'll give it
Paul, before you handle those questions, one of the things we haven't really talked about here is how do you turn on Hybrid Chart and MD Revolution together? And the answer is it happens instantly. So our connection points are already built in, and our systems are already seamlessly talking to one another. So if you want to turn on that connection, that's not something we need to get a project manager involved in.
Yes, I see on the attendee list we do have a couple mutual customers that have joined, and I don't think we have those connections turned on. So you can either reach out to MDR representative or a Hybrid Chart representative to get that connection, and we can start tracking admissions and readmissions as well. Well, I'd like to thank you both. I think it's a testament that this partnership, one of the reasons it does work so well, are two companies that are founded by practicing physicians and practicing cardiologists, and came at solving a solution at different angles. Life cycles on both the companies are very similar. Cultures are very similar, and trying to solve problems for providers out in the field, and also help patients. So again, I've been through a lot of these, so I've been some that don't work as well, and this one has worked from the start, and we're excited to grow it. If there are any other questions, please, you can respond to the webinar. You can add them in the chat here in the next minute or so. We'll also follow up with a recording of the webinar if anybody cares to listen. But on the hybrid chart side, you can reach out to Evan directly for any questions or next steps. And then you can also reach out to myself, Paul Huffman at India Revolution as well at any time, and we can set up either individual discussions, or we have no problem going into discussions together as well at the same time. I'd like to thank again Dr. Sanders and Dr. Damani for their taking time out of their busy schedules, and it was great. It was great to look at the data and why this works so well. So thank you everyone for joining, and if you have any other questions, please reach out.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for your time.